Welcome to Spellbound Studio, everybody. My name is Tracy, and this is Fan Art Friday. Before we get into the video, please become a star in the Spellbound constellation by liking this video or subscribing to the channel. I put out at least 2 videos every week, sometimes 3 videos a week. For ways that you can further support Spellbound Studio, check the links in the description below. Kai Winn, the corrupted faith of Bajoran, and the abuse of power, when spiritual authority becomes self-deception. Kai Winn, first Vedic Winn, later Kai Winn, is one of Deep Space Nine's most discomforting characters, not because she is cartoonishly evil, but because she is tragically human. Her story does not follow a clean arc from virtue to villainy. It twists through self-deception, wounded devotion, political ambition, and a spirituality that becomes a weapon against the very people that she claims to serve. Her downfall is not simply betrayal, it is the corruption of faith itself. She begins as a respected religious figure, a woman who has gone through persecution under the Cardassian occupation. She weathers imprisonment and torture in the name of the prophets, and that history shapes her, not as a saint, but into someone whose faith becomes entangled with power, insecurity, and envy. Deep Space Nine never reduces her to a stereotype, and it does not offer her redemption as a tidy moral. Instead, her path is a meditation on how religion can be both a refuge and a trap, and how true spiritual authority can warp into something very different and self-serving. The character of Kai Winn remains unsettling because she embodies a paradox we see in both ancient mythology and human history. A leader whose fall is not dramatic, but profound in its quiet betrayal of everything that she once claimed to believe in. To understand Kai Winn, we first have to understand her context within the narrative of Deep Space Nine. Bajor has just emerged from decades of brutal occupation by the Cardassian Union. This is a regime marked by forced labor, cultural suppression, and religious persecution. During that period, Bajor's spirituality becomes an anchor of identity and resistance. The underground worship of the prophets, the wormhole entities that Bajorans venerate, was both a spiritual practice and a political act. To teach the prophets was to deny the occupiers. Winn's own testimony in the episode Rapture reveals that she was imprisoned and beaten by the Cardassians for teaching about the prophets. She frames this as her sacrifice to sustain Bajoran faith. And this backstory is important. It situates Kai Winn as someone whose spiritual identity was formed in persecution. Her suffering was real, and it was justified in the context of resistance. But this history also means that when the occupation ends and Bajor enters a fragile peace, Winn's moral compass does not reset, it calcifies. Her trauma and hunger for recognition and her fear of irrelevance becomes hidden engines in her choices. Kai Winn's role is not just religious. In Bajoran society, religion and governance are intertwined. The Kai, the highest religious authority, wields enormous political power. So when Kai Winn pursues the office of Kai, she is not seeking purity, she is seeking authority, legitimacy, and the validation that she never received directly from the prophets that she claims to serve. And this is the first hint of her corrupted faith. Her devotion begins to overlap with her ambition. Her first major appearance in the hands of the prophets showcases the seeds of her spiritual and political corruption. She arrives on Deep Space Nine to protest the teaching of secular science in the station's school system, or rather to demand that Bajoran religious doctrine be given a primary place. Her rhetoric sounds pious. She invokes the prophets. She positions herself as the guardian of faith. But the actions that she takes, summoning her followers, inciting them to disrupt the educational system, and staging a cultural standoff, reveal her deeper motivations. This moment is not merely a clash between religion and science. It is a glimpse into her psychology. Her conception of spiritual authority is inseparable from dominance. Her faith is not a path to meaning, but it is a platform for control. She does not ask others to reflect on the prophets. She demands obedience. In the first episode that we meet her in, she is a Vedic vying for greater influence, but her maneuvering stretches the bounds of spiritual leadership into political coercion. The line between guiding a community and compelling it dissolves in her rhetoric, and the seeds of her downfall, faith turned inward and weaponized against others, are already visible. Her trajectory is not simply ambition. It is the distortion of faith into narcissism. The show constantly reveals that Kai Winn's faith is, at best, conflicted. In earlier seasons, she claims to have endured persecution and suffering for the prophets. Yet she never demonstrates the kind of profound spiritual connection that others, like Captain Sisko, experience directly. She never hears the prophets in the same way that the emissary does. And this lack becomes a wound. This is not a humble wound, but it's a concealed grievance. Her devotion becomes less about divine truth and more about being the chosen one. One of the most revealing interpretive frames for Kai Winn is considering her as someone who wants to be closer to the divine than she actually is. She is not content just teaching about faith. She wants the affirmation of it. Kai Winn wants to be the voice of the prophets, and she wants her suffering validated by vision, certainty, and connection. And this insecurity becomes a narrative hinge. What is faith without affirmation, without direct experience of the divine? For many characters, unanswered prayer is a challenge to their belief. But for Kai Winn, it becomes a resentment that festers. This is why, when an opportunity presents itself in the guise of supernatural confirmation, she seizes it. In the episode The Reckoning, Winn is confronted with a genuine prophetic event, or so it appears. An archaeological tablet that foretells a spiritual confrontation between the prophets and the Piety, with Deep Space Nine as the battleground. Instead of trusting the event as divine, Kai Winn protests that she was not consulted. Her reaction exposes what she wants from the prophets is not their revelation, but their validation of her authority. Her resentment of Captain Sisko, a non-Bajoran, intensifies here, not simply because Sisko is the emissary, but because he embodies exactly the spiritual connection that she wants. She argues not from humility, but from territorial grievance. And this is a striking subversion of religious leadership. The spiritual leader resents the divine choice, not because it is untrue, but because it bypasses her. In this moment, Winn's faith does not inspire awe. It is a jealous claim to power. Her inability to surrender to the moment's mystery reveals that her devotion was never about encounter, but about control. To understand Kai Winn's complexity, it helps to frame her not just as a villain, but as a tragedy of corrupted faith. She is not completely evil. She really did endure persecution under occupation, and she does see herself as a protector of Bajoran identity. Her early actions, supporting the resistance through teaching faith and enduring imprisonment, are real sacrifices that have shaped her worldview. But as peace comes and Bajoran begins a new chapter, her own lens cannot shift. She reads every slight as a threat and every omission as betrayal. And divine silence is personal rejection. Her relationship with power becomes symbiotic. She wants spiritual authority, political relevance, and divine sanction. When the prophets, in narrative terms, never speak to her as they speak to Siska, her reaction is not to reflect, it is to envy, and that envy becomes her undoing. By the time Ducat, who is in disguise as the Bajoran tenant, he manipulates her in the final arc. Her spiritual insecurity has metastasized into something deadly. She embraces the Piety path, not because she suddenly believes in evil, but because she believes this other power acknowledges her worth when the prophets do not. And this reframing complicates a simple moral judgment. Is she a traitor? Yes, in action. But her betrayal is the culmination of a life lived wanting confirmation from an absence of divinity. Her downfall is not the loss of faith, but the exploitation of it. This turns devotion into ego and reverence into entitlement. And there is a sorrow in watching a spiritual leader chase her own reflection. She's not chasing a God or truth, she's chasing her reflection. She wants her suffering to mean something, and when it does not, she tries to make it mean everything. Kai Winn's narrative is not a simple morality play. It is a study in the corruption of what should have been sacred. Her faith, born in persecution, hardened in power, and twisted by resentment. This shows how spiritual authority can be weaponized not for transcendence, but for self-justification. She loses her way not in a moment of great evil, but in the slow erosion of genuine connection to what she claims to worship. In the end, Kai Winn does not seek redemption. She does not repent in a way that heals herself. Her final choices reveal not clarity but desperation, a longing to be chosen, to belong, and to be validated by a power that never directly spoke to her. Her story refuses easy answers. She is not a simple villain. She is not a cautionary tale. She is a tragic echo of what happens when faith is hollowed out and replaced by the hunger to be recognized. Oh, my stars, I always want to know what you think. Do you think that Kai Winn's downfall tells us about the danger of seeking power in the name of faith, rather than through genuine spiritual encounter? Please, I look forward to reading your comments, so make sure to leave one below. And until next time, stay creative and stay spellbound.